Hello, everyone, and welcome. It's Sunday night, September 29th, 2024, and my name's Glenn Rawson. Welcome to our devotional. The title of tonight's devotional is, Lord, If Thou Wilt. Just a couple of things by way of announcement. Monday morning, I leave bright and early with Dennis, and we're going out to Martin's Cove and back. And that's a 3-day tour. We did it several years ago, and it was very successful. We're doing it again. And I wanted to let you know that coming up in 2025, Dennis and I will do a Mormon Battalion tour, and that will be through California, through northern, down into Southern California, and then back home. And if you have ancestors that were in the battalion, then that is a tour that you must go on. It is, the places where your ancestors marched. It's an amazing experience. The Anza Borrego Desert, not the least of which. Also, we're going to do a couple of Martin's Cove tours next year, a couple of Pioneer Trail tours from Nauvoo to Salt Lake City. Those will all be with History of the Saints next year. And of course, my favorite, or I guess I have to say honestly, one of my favorites is the Great American Cowboy and Old West tour is coming off with History of the Saints next year. So those are the things I'm doing with History of the Saints and with Glenn Rawson Stories next year. They're combined together. And speaking of Glenn Rawson Stories, the Year 5 book is out. The compilation of all of the free stories that we sent out last year is now available. I think it's already been mailed. If you didn't get your copy, then please let me know, and we'll get it sent out to you right away. And if you're looking for extra copies as gifts, I know that Jason's got them listed at a discount price if you wanted to pick up some extra copies as gifts. But either way, thank you, all of you, for your constant support. I am very, very grateful. My intention, and I've said it many times, is not to make a lot of money, and of course that's working, but it is to spread the gospel news all over the world and be a missionary in some little way if I can. So with that, tonight I ask for an interest in your prayers. Some of the stories I'm going to share with you tonight came from my recent experience with Dennis and a wonderful group of 44 people. We got back off of the Pioneer Trail just a couple of nights ago, and we had a wonderful experience out there. I love being out on the trail. It's like hallowed ground where people were tested and came through and demonstrated faith and courage. I just love being out there and some of the stories that took place out there, like this one. Margaret Kirkwood was born August 9th, 1809 in Kilbarchan, Scotland, and joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints April 1st, 1840. By the time Margaret departed Scotland for America, she had already buried her husband and 2 of her 6 children. Well, the Kirkwood family arrived in Iowa City June 26, 1856, and they were organized into and became a part of the Willie Handcart Company. Margaret sold most of her precious belongings to obtain the money to get a handcart and supplies. Margaret traveled across Iowa and into Nebraska with her 4 sons, Robert, 22, Thomas, 19, James, 11, and Joseph, 4. Now, Thomas is a special situation. Some years before, he had been injured on the streets of Glasgow, and he was unable to walk. So, Thomas, as an invalid, was pulled in the handcart by his mother, a frail, petite woman of only 5 feet in height, and by his older brother, Robert. When winter snows caught the Willie Company along the Sweetwater River in Wyoming, it made an already heavy burden almost unbearable. And then, October 22nd, 23rd, then came the ordeal of Rocky Ridge. On the night of October 23rd, the Willie Company was forced to go 15 miles in a storm up and over Rocky Ridge, that awful exposed summit in the face of a winter storm. With Thomas in the cart, Margaret and Robert struggled all day and into the next to pull that cart up over the summit and down into Rock Creek Hollow. Meanwhile, the story that most everyone knows, that the other brother, James, picked up little Joseph, who's only 4, who could no longer walk. James picked him up and carried him on his back up over Rocky Ridge and down into Rock Creek Hollow. Now, James and Joseph would not reach camp until the following morning. Upon reaching camp, James Kirkwood set his little brother down by the fireside. Then James, quoting, having so faithfully carried out his task, collapsed and died from overexposure and overexertion. End of quote. Now, what is remarkable is that devotion of 2 older brothers who would labor so long and hard to carry their younger brothers. One would live, the other would not. But they live on today as cherished pioneer memories. And one more thing that is not generally known. When the Kirkwood family became members of the church, Margaret was disowned by her prominent family in Scotland, who were fabric designers. And also, she was disowned by the Kirkwood family. Sister Kirkwood made the statement many times that if it were necessary, she would go through all the hardships and heartaches again for the gospel's sake. End of quote. That's what I'm talking about. Those are the kinds of stories that we spend a week talking about coming across that trail. These were amazing people who were very ordinary. Next story. Early on this trail tour, we were in Nauvoo. We spent time in Nauvoo. And one of the people that we had on that tour was a descendant of Jessie Ann Smith. So this story is for her. Jesse Nathaniel Smith was the first cousin to the prophet Joseph Smith and knew him well right up to the very end of the prophet's life. When the saints went west, Jesse was among them. He was sent to colonize after arriving down to Arizona, where he became a stake president, a patriarch, a great and good man. 1 year prior to his death, Jesse was asked to share his memories of the prophet Joseph with students in a church history class taught by John Henry Evans at LDS College. The date of Jesse's presentation was April 11th, 1905. Jesse said the following: I may say I was never so impressed by any person. I am unable to fully describe my sensations when in the presence of this wonderful man. I only know that I rejoiced being in his presence. I will speak of the domestic life of the prophet. My mother being a widow, he noticed her children. She had 2 sons. He asked them over to his house. He made them welcome. They were at liberty to remain in his household. In this way, we passed some time under his roof. I was intimate with his children, especially with the one that came into prominence and was known as young Joseph. I know that queenly woman, his wife, Emma Smith. I may say that I was greatly impressed with her personality. She was the fitting helpmate of such a man. I stood in awe of this lady far more than I did of the prophet himself, because he was so considerate of the feelings of the children. His domestic animals, still speaking of the prophet, his domestic animals seemed to love him. He was very fond of horses. He had a few very fine horses, one remarkable dog, the house dog. They called him Major. The dog and the horses rejoiced when they saw this man because he took care of them, because he recognized them in their places as God's creatures. He did not require unreasonable things of them. He was kindness itself to every human being, especially to his own household. His children rejoiced when he was present, and this was not so very remarkable. They could not do otherwise with so good and kind of a father. I will say another thing, Jesse continued. that I feel to be equally true. Joseph Smith was a gentleman in the very highest sense of the word. I never heard that said before, but I will stake my reputation on it, that I know it was true. He was especially neat in his appearance. He was unusually tidy. He was exceptionally tidy. When I have seen him almost at the best advantage, when he was attired in a military uniform. He was an officer of the military organization known as the Nauvoo Legion. My younger brothers and sisters, the name of this man has been sacred to me. It has been next to that of the Blessed Redeemer in my estimation. I knew him, Joseph, at home. I knew him in his public ministry. I listened to him in his house and also in the congregation of the people. And at every walk of life, he stood at the head. I do not expect that you will ever become as enthusiastic as I am about Joseph Smith. I never said a word in my life that seemed to bless me so as when I've said a good word for Joseph Smith. End of quote. Now, why do I take the time to share such memories and such an intimate testimony? In the hopes that you will never forget what Jesse Nathaniel Smith said, that you may be influenced by his testimony, as Jesse himself was. Many years later, Jesse's daughter, Hannah Daphne Smith Dalton, wrote of her father receiving a mission call and having to leave his family. She said, quote, "Separation was sad, and I remember very well how white and frail and pitiful my mother looked when my father took her in his arms just before he left. His last words to me were, 'Daphne, my darling, honest daughter, be good and kind to your dear mother.' These words were constantly before me all of my life. Father was gone 2.5 years on this mission, and every letter he wrote to me while he was away always started with, 'My darling, honest daughter, Hannah Daphne.' How I loved that dear good man. When I would see him worried or in trouble, I used to go close to him and pat his hand and often kiss him. And I never can forget the sweet smile he would give me." Could it be that Jesse became that kind of an honored, revered father because he had seen it in the example of the prophet Joseph Smith? I don't know. Either way, I share this testimony, Jesse's testimony, the prophet Joseph Smith, that you might be comforted, assured, and affirmed in your testimony of Joseph and of his character. Next story. Spring, 1833, Avon, Ohio. A church meeting was underway. A missionary stood up to preach, but there was a man in the congregation determined to stop him. The man was known as the county bully and had proven an annoyance to every speaker so far. This night he was particularly boisterous, and when he called out for the missionary to cast out a devil, the elder suddenly stopped speaking, beelined his way down through the crowd, grabbed the tormentor bodily, carried him to the back door, and threw him 10 feet out the back door onto a woodpile. A ripple of humor spread through the crowd, and the saying went up that the missionary had cast out the devil, soul and body. Well, that courageous, strong, determined missionary was none other than David W. Patten, a powerful man, physically, yes, but also spiritually, a man of great faith. He was among those called to serve in the very first Quorum of the 12 Apostles in 1835. His service to the Lord was constant and varied. It's him, while serving as a missionary in Tennessee in the spring of 1836, who stood face to face with that Cain who slew Abel. When the saints faced persecution and mobocracy in Missouri, it was Elder Patten whose indomitable courage and leadership earned him the nickname Captain Fear Not. It was October of 1838 when Captain Patten learned that a family had been threatened by the mob. So in command of a small group of men, he found the mother and children homeless, destitute, and suffering. He gathered them up and brought them to safety. While doing so, it began to rain, adding to the misery already abundant. So, David stopped, dismounted his horse, stepped off into the tall, wet grass, where he commanded the storm to cease until the woman and her little ones could be conveyed to safety. The storm stopped immediately. Then, sometime around midnight, October 24th, 1838, word reached far west that the mob had kidnapped some of the local brethren and were threatening to kill 3 Latter-day Saints from an outlying farm. So 75 men volunteered under the leadership of Captain Patten to find them and rescue them. They rode all night across the darkened prairie, searching for the mob. And then just before sunrise, while approaching Crooked River from the east in Missouri, a voice called out, "Who goes there?" The mob opened fire and men began to fall. Captain Patten called God and liberty and led the charge. The mob scattered and began to run. As they fled, one mobber stepped out from behind a tree and shot Elder Patten in the stomach. He was mortally wounded. He was carried toward far west, but the agony of the movement was too much for him. At the home of Stephen Winchester, his brethren and his wife gathered around him. To his wife, he said in his last moments, and this is so significant, he said to her, "Whatever else you do, do not deny the faith." Turning to the prophet Joseph and Hiram and Elder Kimball, he said, "Brethren, you have held me here by your faith, but do give me up and let me go, I beseech you." They did so. And moments later, David Wyman Patten was gone, becoming the first apostolic martyr of this dispensation. He was laid to rest somewhere near far west, his grave today unknown and unmarked. But as for Elder Patten, the Lord would later declare, "I took him unto myself." Let's take a break. Once again, dear friends, the Year 5 collection is available. And if you would like more information on it, go to glenrawsonstories.com. It's available there. And also, I wanted to make mention of this. There are 3 distinct chapters of church history that you can go see. Phase 1 is the story of church history that goes from Palmyra, New York to Nauvoo. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2 of church history is that pioneer trail. And chapter 3 is the great settlement of the West here in the Rocky Mountains. So next year, with Fun for Less Tours, I'm taking 2 groups of people from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, through New York, Ohio, Missouri, and ending in Nauvoo. Boots on the ground for 2 weeks, beginning on May 9th, and then again the second group on June 6th. If you haven't been there, it will change your testimony to go. Not because of me, but because of the sacred and holy sites and the events so sacred to us that happen there. Almost every chapter of Scripture, every revelation and every doctrine restored in this latter day is tied to the soil, a place, the real estate. It changes the whole story. Stand on the ground and see where Joseph actually saw the Father and the Son. Next year, May 9th, June 6th, Fun for Less Tours. I'm inviting you. Are you okay? I hope you're well. Next story. Just a few days ago, my daughter, Donnie Jo, took her boys and went to the farmer's market, and they got a booth. Tucker, who is 12, sold homemade bath bombs, and Hunter, who is 10, sold homemade potions. D'Artagnan, the younger one, who is only 6, he wanted to join in too. So Mom filled him up a cooler with Rice Krispies and pop and water and yeah. So as everything progressed at the farmer's market, Tucker and Hunter didn't do too bad. Both made about $25 to $35 each. But not one person bought anything from D'Artagnan. Well, Dart didn't say anything. He just sat there quietly, not complaining. After a while, Mom felt sorry, so she bought a pop from him just to make him feel better. As soon as the other boys, though, as soon as Tucker and Hunter made any money, they went right out in the farmer's market and bought the things they wanted from the other booths. And then it happened. All of a sudden, around 7:30, just before they closed, a bunch of people started showing up, coming up to Dart and buying his stuff. Mom said, I thought that was weird because he hadn't made a single sale the whole time, and now a dozen people wanted his drinks. Well, Mom looked around to see what was going on. And then she saw Tucker over at another booth, handing people money and pointing at D'Artagnan. Those people then came straight over and bought from little brother. Tucker was spending the last of his profits to help his brother. Mom said, I watched him go from one person to the next, handing them money and sending them to his brother. End quote. Well, D'Artagnan got so excited. Now he had money too. Finally, Tucker came back over. Mom quietly pulled him aside, and he admitted he'd been paying people to make Dart feel better. Mom asked him how much money he had left. He reached in his pocket, showed her the few dollars left. When she asked, "That's it?" he shrugged his shoulders and said 2 words, "Worth it." Needless to say, Mom was proud. So's Grandpa. Way to go, Tucker. I hope you never change. Next story. The story of the rescue begins October 4th, 1856 in Salt Lake City. President Brigham Young was informed that 4 companies of immigrants, more than 1,000 people, were still out on the plains of Wyoming. There was little reaction or urgency in that first meeting. However, the next day, President Young came to conference, General Conference of the Church, speaking with the voice of 7 thunders, calling for men and wagons to go out on the plains and bring them in. He said, quote, I will now give this people the subject and the text for the elders who may speak during the conference. The text will be to get them here. I want the brethren who speak to understand that their text is the problem on the plains. That is my religion. That is the dictation of the Holy Ghost that I possess. It is to save the people. I will tell you, Brigham continued, that all your faith, religion, and professions of religion will never save one soul of you in the celestial kingdom of our God unless you carry out just such principles as I'm now teaching you. Go and bring those people now on the plains. End of quote. President Young wanted 20 teams and wagons ready to go the next morning. So determined was he that if wagons and teams were not volunteered, they would be, he said, confiscated by the city marshal and pressed into service. Well, the wagons were donated, along with huge quantities of food, clothing, bedding, and other supplies. And just after noon on October 7th, the teams set out of Salt Lake up Immigration Canyon under the leadership of Captain George D. Grant. The first great miracle of that rescue is it wasn't snowing when they left. Salt Lake City was warm. Wyoming was warm, sunny, pleasant. And yet, thanks to the urgency of Brother Brigham's call, men and supplies reached the Willie Company October 19th, 1856. The very first day of the snowfall and the very day that the Willie Company ran out of food. Brigham Young was a prophet, a seer, and a revelator. President Young even tried to go out and help himself, but he became grievously ill and was forced to turn back. However, under his urging, a steady stream of men, wagons, and so forth left their homes, left Salt Lake, dropped everything, and went out on the plains in search of the 4 lost companies. Some of those men would not return for more than 6 months. In the end, each company was found and brought forward. The moment when they realized when they were not forgotten, but that the prophet and his brethren had come for them, is best described by John Chislett, who was there. He said, just as the sun was sinking beautifully behind the distant hills, on an eminence immediately west of our camp, several covered wagons were seen coming towards us. The news ran through the camp like wildfire. Shouts of joy rent the air. Strong men wept. Little children danced around with gladness. As the brethren entered our camp, the sisters fell upon them and deluged the brethren with kisses. End of quote. At Martin's Cove on November 4th, 1856, the temperature was -6. The rescuers had to get those people out of the wind. The decision was made to move them into a sheltered ravine about 2.5 miles from Devil's Gate. But in order to do that, it became necessary to cross the Sweetwater River again. Now understand, and if you've been with me on that trail, you've heard me say it before, river crossings always meant death to the immigrants. And now, this was no different. It was just too much for many of them to bear. John Jakes witnessed this on the edge of the Sweetwater. One of those men was so worn down, and he asked in a plaintive tone, "Have we got to go across there?" looking at the river. On being answered, he was so much affected that he was completely overcome. That was the last straw. His fortitude and manhood gave way. Quoting, he exclaimed, "Oh dear, I can't go through that," and burst into tears. His wife, who was by his side, had the stouter heart of the two. At that juncture, she said soothingly, "Don't cry, Jimmy. I'll pull a handcart for you." But she didn't have to. The men from the valley stepped forward and carried the suffering immigrants across the ice-bound river. Harvey Clough was there, and he was one of them. He said, quote, "Men of old age and women were carried across on the backs of these sturdy mountain boys. In this instance, as in many others, the value of the boys from Zion was of great help to the weary saints." There were at least 18 rescuers who carried the saints across the river that day. Only 5 of them do we actually know by name. This moment at the Sweetwater represents the incalculable sacrifice of all of the rescuers who left everything right here in this valley to go and help their brethren. The rescue of more than 1,000 stranded, freezing, dying pioneers is one of the finest hours of this church and our people. It was Christ-like love in action. President Gordon B. Hinckley would say of the efforts of those rescuers, there is no more heroic episode in all of our history. And it wasn't just the 18 men at the Sweetwater River either. Robert T. Burton, one of the rescuers, movingly described watching 104 wagons loaded with rescued immigrants making their way over Little Mountain and down into Salt Lake City. The snow on each side taller than the wagons themselves. He said this, quote, "I cannot leave this subject without expressing thanks to those brave men who were constant day and night in their efforts to save the people. And more especially do I wish to remember those who endangered their lives to carry messages east and west under the most difficult circumstances. Notable among these," he said, Joseph A. Young, Stephen Taylor, Cyrus H. Wheelock, Abel Gard, Dan Jones, most of whom have passed away. And of course, he said, too much credit cannot be given to the entire company for their indefatigable labors night and day, as before stated, to save the people. End of quote. Have we forgotten that story? Have we let the brightness of that courage and faith dim just a bit? I tell you that story to keep the memory alive. Please. Next story. A short time ago, I was with that wonderful group of people in Liverpool, England. We were walking along the Albert Docks. We got off the coach and began walking along the banks of the Mersey River. Now, that's a most interesting walk if you've never been there. The first thing you notice when you reach the river, after noticing the river itself, is locks. Thousands of them. Padlocks locked on the fence running all along the docks, along the bank of the Mersey. Now, I don't know when or where or how, but a tradition grew up along that stretch of the docks that lovers would come there together, snap a padlock on that heavy chain fence, and then, as a token of pledging their love, throw the key into the river, that their love would never be broken. I don't know how long that tradition's been going on, but I suspect probably quite a while. There are thousands and thousands of locks stretching hundreds of yards along that river. Some of the locks are large, ornate. Some are very small. Some are really fancy, but most of them are, well, they're pretty ordinary. Now, the tradition of Lovelocks dates way back into time immemorial. It used to be that lovers would clip a lock of hair, give it to their betrothed in a locket, and in that way, no matter where they went, their beloved was always with them as a reminder of the happy times of the heart. Well, as time went on, some chose to evolve the concept from locks of hair into a padlock. Perhaps it's fitting that so much love has been pledged and locked along that river, because it was the port of Liverpool where for hundreds of years sailors set out to sea in voyages across the world, leaving their beloveds behind, sometimes never to come back. The first thing that struck me on this latest walk was the state of some of the locks. Many, if not most, well, they were rusted. Some of them were about to fall off. It was easy to see that some were brand new, having been recently snapped into place by starry-eyed lovers. But then there were some locks that you could tell were really, really old. But they were not showing the effects of wind, storm, rain, and salt. They were old, you could tell, but they were enduring. I have thought about that fence ever since this last walk. I really hope that the city fathers never take that fence down as they have in some other places. To me, that walk along the docks is a hallowed place, made so by love. It's a powerful reminder that love is one of the most powerful, sacred, and happiness-invoking of human emotions. So much so that God Himself is love and has sanctified that love and promised that it can be eternal. However, like those rusty padlocks, the pledges of love we make in this world after the manner of this world, well, they will in time rust out and not endure. Their lock, albeit locked on that fence in a moment with the most sincere intent, is not made of that material to endure into the next life. There are others, my friends, who are locked by the authority of the Almighty, and their lock can remain locked, binding them to each other, locked, tight, strong, and true forever. It can, but only under certain circumstances. Those individuals who abide by those covenants will have a locked and guaranteed claim on each other beyond the grave when the locks of others will not have the power to endure. They will rust out and the bond will not hold. The Lovelocks of Albert Docks is a beautiful and a poignant place. If I had the power, I would stand there with every couple by that fence that snapped a lock, and I would say to them, go ahead, snap that lock, pledge your love, and stand by it. But there is a higher, holier lock that will truly last forever. Would you truly like to make your love forever? Well, there is a way. Last story. In the ancient world, leprosy was a terrible, incurable disease. Elder James E. Talmage once said of that disease, quote, "Leprosy is nothing short of a living death, a corrupting of all the humors, a poisoning of the very springs of life, a dissolution little by little of the whole body, so that one limb after another actually decayed and fell away." End of quote. Moreover, the curse of leprosy went beyond the physical. The person so afflicted was considered unclean and required to separate themselves from all human contact. They were cast out and cut off from home, family, and friends, and consigned to live in the ruins of tombs with only the company of others similarly cursed to die slowly and neglected. Scarcely at the time of the Savior could there be a more miserable way to live, suffer, and slowly die. Now that said, somewhere in the Galilee, early in the Master's ministry, a man full of leprosy approached the Savior and fell before him, worshiping him. "Lord," he cried, "if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean." Somehow, he knew that Jesus was the Messiah and had the power to heal him. But would he? Would he take pity on one so unworthy, so loathsome, and so despised. Mark records, though, and Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand and touched him, and said unto him, I will, be thou clean. What a sight that must have been. For immediately the leprosy fell away, and the man was made whole before their very eyes. Jesus straitly commanded him to tell no one, and go to the priests and present the offering required by the law of Moses. Jesus had made him whole. The priests would pronounce him clean and bring him back into the community. Now, I've thought a lot about this. Please consider you. Please consider, what if that leper represents each of us in our fallen, unrepented state, our sins, the misery thereof, and its loathsome effects slowly killing us, spiritually decaying our soul. But we come to Jesus, and knowing full well that we are unworthy, sick, and afflicted before him, as good as dead, we beg for his help. And when no one else can help us, when no one else will help us, he will. No matter who or what or how bad off you may be, it is required of all of us to ask for his help. And when we do, he will reach across all distances and with his healing hand touch you, me. Still, I tell you that story because I want you to love Jesus more. I want you to trust him more. I want you to have confidence and faith that he will heal you and save you. Good night, and God bless.